Welcome to the Our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to the Our World Heritage Sustainability Debate session called Integration of the Regional Recommendations for the 50th Anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. This is the penultimate session. We are closing the month soon. Only the youth forum is left tomorrow before we are through with our sessions, which means what are we leaving to our youth and our future generations? Today, we will try to conclude what we've been discussing all month through various diverse sessions and themes. And I would like to, at this point, thank to all our speakers and our attendees who are with us today. And a big thank you to our wonderful OWH sustainability team. Some of our colleagues are here today with us who organized the session together. I would just like to remind you of a few logistics before we get going. We have interpretation today, Spanish to English. You can see the button at the bottom left side of your screen. Please press the mute original button when you are using interpretation, which will avoid duplicate sounds to be heard. We have a question and answer box. Please pose any questions you may have in the Q&A box. You can also use our chat box for general greetings and comments, of course. The session is recorded and live streamed on YouTube as per usual procedure. So let us move on to our concept for today. So here is a framework summary of what we will be addressing today and what we have been addressing throughout the month as well. So we're talking about the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, of course. We are very much devoted, committed to the success of this convention and to protecting the wonderful, precious sites around the world that are inscribed on the World Heritage List. And we feel the need to renew the original spirit and mission of the convention by engaging citizens, civil society groups, and professional and academic organizations. We are seeking a true alignment between the protection of outstanding universal value, which defines World Heritage, and sustainable development objectives. And sometimes we see that these are not truly aligned. There are misinterpretations. At the moment, the 44th session of the World Heritage Committee is ongoing. For those of you who have tuned into these sessions, you may find surprising debates and controversies. We really would seek that an improved understanding and practice of interpreting, assessing, and managing development in World Heritage Sites will go a long way to remedy some negative, risky situations that we are identifying. So our World Heritage Sustainability Team has organized this month with these objectives, looking at challenges and solutions guided by the concepts that are defined in the UNESCO World Heritage and Sustainable Development Policy of 2015 and the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development: People, Planet, Prosperity, Peace, and Partnerships. We believe in the sustainable as a more sustainable form of development grounded in OUV, managed with transparency, dialogue, and understanding. So our month-long debate has covered a variety of themes, from interpretation to landscape, indigenous heritage to climate change, social capital, alternative models, youth, of course, and a particular focus on evaluating a broad range of case studies that we have drawn a lot of ideas from. So today in this session, we present a synthesis of these outcomes and recommendations from the case studies, as well as the month sessions debates, which will go to contributing to policy recommendations for the 50th anniversary of the convention. So today we have a stellar, wonderful list of speakers. Again, some very senior, seasoned, and visionary names in the World Heritage world. They are here today with you. You can see we will introduce them one by one moving forward. Here is a short note on the session organizers. Jana Das Chowdhury is our rapporteur today, and I'm the moderator. We're also supported by Lucia Pesci, who is one of our speakers today. So Jana is an architect. I would like to introduce her briefly. She has experience of more than 20 years in both private and public sector in India in urban heritage management. She left her position at the Delhi Development Authority, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs in the government of India. And she now founded the Institute of Heritage Research, a think tank for policy research on heritage management. She was awarded the Fulbright Nehru Doctoral and Professional Research Fellowship to pursue research in the US. And she's a member of the UNESCO World Heritage Institute of Training and Research for the Asia Pacific, WITRAP, based in Shanghai. And she's a member of ICOMOS India and the Working Group on Climate Change and Heritage. She holds a life membership with the Council of Architecture and affiliated with the Center for Sustainable Habitat at the GNDU University, Amritsar, India. So I will now pass the floor to Jana herself to make a few remarks and present some more information for us. Please, Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ege, for a very kind introduction. And I shall begin by introducing you first. Of course, Ege Yildirim, she doesn't need any introduction, but anyhow, as a formality, I'm going to introduce her. So Dr. Ege Yildirim, today's moderator and also our World Heritage Sustainability Debate Coordinator. She's an urban planner and heritage conservation specialist with over 20 plus years of experience working in Turkey and internationally. Based in Istanbul since 2013, she's an independent consultant and scholar. She previously worked at KAB BA Architecture Ankara, Abu Dhabi Authority for Culture and Heritage, Site Management of Historic Guild Town of Mundunu, and the EU Turkey Anatolian Archaeology and Cultural Heritage Institute project. Ege was a Fulbright Scholar at Pratt Institute, New York, and a Kaplan Fellow at the Koç University, Istanbul, and most recently, ICOMOS focal point for the SDGs. So we have come almost to the conclusion of a 1 month long debate on our World Heritage and Sustainability. And to quickly take you through the sessions, it's been a long journey and it almost felt like, we are a family as we, proceeded from July 1st to going to July 31st. So July session 1, we had the inaugural session, our World Heritage and Sustainability. July 2nd, we covered heritage as a development strategy, followed by heritage and climate change, partnering through culture, heritage, and art for resilient, inclusive recovery, and UN high-level political forums. It was a side event. And session 5, we covered Indigenous Forum 1, from singular heritage to integral categories, from heritage to heritage landscape. This was followed by Indigenous Forum 2, And then we had workshops from regional to global approach case studies 1 on the 15th, and on the 16th, we had from the regional to the global approaches case study 2. On July 17th, we had the debate on heritage as a language of inclusion, followed by, in session 11, alternative social and governance models for World Heritage. Further, tourism and the creative economy for sustainable heritage. And from the regional to the global approaches, case studies, plenaries discussion that we had on the 24th July. And yesterday we had recommendation for heritage sites, listing process, the role of civil society. And here we are today, integration of the regional recommendations for the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. Tomorrow we have the youth forum, and our month-long debate ends there, and it was almost like we felt that we were working in the same room sometimes, in spite of our geographical differences. So Ege, I'm going to give you the floor and just rock it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jana. As you see, we've had a long marathon of sessions, and today Lucia has been our guiding light as one of our conveners of the sustainability team. So I will introduce her before giving her the floor today as our first speaker. She is the Vice President of the Latin American Network of Environmental Sciences, FLACAM. She's a PhD candidate in urbanism at the moment in UPC Spain. She has a Master in Sustainable Development from UNLA FLACAM. I mentioned her FLACAM role. She's also at the Unesco Chair Unitwin Network for Sustainable Development, Vice President of the CEPA Foundation, the Center for Environmental Studies and Projects. She's a Technical Secretary of the Chair in Sustainability Policies, UNLP, teacher of the Specialization and Master's Degree in Sustainable Development, developed by FLACAM together with UNLA, which is the National University of Lanús in Argentina. She has participated in more than 50 projects in various countries in Latin America, covering sustainable urban territorial development, planning, strategic planning, tourism planning, urban regional plans, heritage and landscape, of course, cultural landscapes, and so forth. So here we have our first accomplished speaker. Lucia, the floor is yours. I will stop sharing now and let you do your own slide sharing. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ege, y por supuesto, muy buenas tardes a todos. Realmente es un honor compartir esta sesión con todos ustedes y presentarles el mensaje final del equipo de sustentabilidad. Lo que presentaré es el producto del trabajo de meses de nuestro equipo, enriquecido por los resultados de nuestra convocatoria de estudios de caso y de un muy intenso y productivo mes de debate. Para comenzar, creemos que la implementación de la Convención del Patrimonio Mundial actualmente no logra una verdadera alineación entre la protección del valor universal excepcional y el desarrollo sustentable, lo que permite que las malas interpretaciones de este último socaven el primero. Se necesita urgentemente una mejor comprensión y práctica de la interpretación, evaluación y gestión del desarrollo en los sitios de patrimonio mundial para remediar esta situación. El patrimonio mundial es un medio para lograr nuestra transformación en sociedades más empoderadas, justas y resilientes a nivel local. Los procesos de desarrollo pueden y deben reconfigurarse para reflejar plenamente la contribución de la conservación del patrimonio en una forma de desarrollo más sustentable, basada en el valor universal excepcional, gestionada con transparencia, diálogo y comprensión. En este marco, la Convención del Patrimonio no es un obstáculo para el desarrollo, sino una buena práctica para una forma de desarrollo más sustentable. Esta posición está alineada, por supuesto, con la política de patrimonio mundial y desarrollo sostenible aprobada por la Unesco en el 2015, que debería ser implementada más activamente por todas las partes interesadas. Los criterios para inscribir y gestionar el patrimonio mundial deben incorporar plenamente la sustentabilidad. Esto asegurará la conservación para el futuro a través de valores compartidos globalmente y múltiples formas de conocimiento. La sustentabilidad incorpora los paradigmas ambientales, económicos y sociales, incluida la conservación del patrimonio natural y cultural, y se refleja en la noción de sociedad, planeta y prosperidad. Este paradigma requiere transformar a todos los actores en protagonistas para promover la conservación para el desarrollo local y los procesos de justicia social, sumando así paz y alianzas. Desde este enfoque, los principios priorizados por el equipo de sustentabilidad, que resuenan con las 5 metas estratégicas del Patrimonio Mundial de la Unesco, incluyen lo siguiente. Paisaje. El paisaje es el contexto que le da carácter al sitio. El paisaje es el resultado de interacciones históricas entre sus dimensiones ecológica y sociocultural. El paisaje no es solo el gran patrimonio de todos los patrimonios, es también el contexto territorial del sitio patrimonial y la expresión existencial de su cultura. Las declaraciones de valor universal excepcional deben reconocer el continuo cultura-naturaleza e incluir el paisaje alrededor del sitio seleccionado. Desarrollo a largo plazo a través de economías circulares y regenerativas. El sitio del patrimonio debe verse dentro de un marco de gestión que se centre en un proceso de desarrollo continuo a largo plazo. Las propuestas para la gestión, planificación y diseño de sitios deben incluir los conceptos de economías circulares y regenerativas para apoyar el mantenimiento del patrimonio y permitir la gestión sustentable del paisaje y el medio ambiente. De esta forma, la conservación del patrimonio se convierte en una forma de desarrollo sustentable. Desarrollo de capacidades y comunidad. Es fundamental fortalecer la capacidad de la población local, por ejemplo, en la cadena de valor que establece el activo a preservar junto con el turismo, la producción regional, la preservación de la cultura, la participación ciudadana y la expansión de las libertades. Existe una profunda interrelación entre el patrimonio de las comunidades y su bienestar, que debe basarse en enfoques basados en derechos y culturalmente apropiados, reconociendo, por supuesto, a los pueblos autóctonos y sus culturas. Comunicación y transparencia. Se necesita un sistema más fuerte, más representativo y transparente de participación de las partes interesadas, con un enfoque en la sociedad civil y las comunidades, para garantizar la comunicación y el diálogo necesarios para que los impactos del desarrollo se evalúen con mayor precisión, comprensión mutua y una comodidad óptima. Al asegurar el consenso, todas las decisiones relativas al desarrollo en los sitios de patrimonio mundial se tomarán salvaguardando al máximo el bienestar de la comunidad y el ecosistema. Enfoque transversal. Los sitios de patrimonio mundial deben gestionarse con un enfoque transdisciplinario que vaya más allá de la especialización sectorial para garantizar métodos de trabajo multiescalares. Conexiones territoriales. Los valores patrimoniales forman parte de una red de nodos, conglomerados y conexiones socioespaciales en la región, tanto en términos de lugares como de personas. Los itinerarios del patrimonio cultural y natural deben manifestar esta red en el sistema territorial. Y por último, buen gobierno. Como requisito previo para la paz, la libertad y el desarrollo sustentable, los sitios del patrimonio mundial deben tratar de resolver los conflictos a través del diálogo abierto, evitando la violencia y los conflictos físicos por todos los medios, buscando constantemente la buena gobernanza del territorio y la sociedad en los que se encuentra. El buen gobierno incluye transparencia en la información, rendición de cuentas en la gestión, comunicación basada en la empatía y la reconciliación, el respeto del Estado de Derecho y los derechos humanos. Este principio garantizará la protección del patrimonio natural, construido e inmaterial, así como la protección del bienestar socioeconómico de las comunidades. A continuación, hemos identificado los que siguen como principios globales y hemos ilustrado las diapositivas que siguen con imágenes de algunos de nuestros estudios de caso. Políticas integrales y dinámicas. La gestión sustentable del patrimonio es un proceso multidisciplinario y dinámico que muchos países han colocado en el centro de sus políticas para la protección y conservación integral de su patrimonio natural y cultural, especialmente mediante el establecimiento de normas para el desarrollo de políticas, asistencia, protocolos e intervenciones técnicas adecuadas. Soluciones de base local. Los desafíos económicos, sociales, culturales y ambientales que enfrentan las regiones globales y el mundo en general no encontrarán una solución duradera si no se plantean a nivel de los territorios locales y las sociedades que allí operan. Fomento de la capacidad horizontal. Este hecho fundamental impone la necesidad de pensar en nuevas políticas y acciones concretas, en un contexto donde los intercambios regionales y acciones constituyen una verdadera oportunidad para el desarrollo de capacidades, a través del principio de asociación, no verticalmente, sino horizontalmente. De esta manera podemos fortalecer identidades comunes para enfrentar desafíos comunes. La cooperación horizontal, por su transversalidad, moviliza a varios actores y la pericia bilateral que se desprende de ella participa en el desarrollo de políticas públicas en los países ahora receptivos a los beneficios de la solidaridad. Y patrimonio y desarrollo holísticos. En este sentido, el patrimonio integral y holístico juega un papel clave. Es un elemento esencial de la diversidad natural y cultural que caracteriza a cada región. Ofrece un entorno de calidad en general, respetuoso de las limitaciones del ecosistema del que es producto. Representa una oportunidad de desarrollo basada en activos endógenos de territorios similares y a menudo requiere un enfoque social para promover su preservación. Debe apoyarse la tendencia ascendente observada en muchos países para colocar el patrimonio en el centro de las estrategias y los problemas de desarrollo. Las reflexiones sobre planificación urbana, turismo sustentable, mejora de la calidad de vida, desarrollo económico y cohesión social no pueden ni deben desconectarse de las políticas y estrategias patrimoniales y paisajísticas. El trabajo realizado en los últimos años ha revelado en este sentido que los países que han logrado poner en valor su patrimonio han adoptado, de hecho, un conjunto de buenas prácticas y métodos que se basan fundamentalmente en nuevos modelos de gobernanza participativa y colaborativa. Este hallazgo es consistente con la investigación realizada por nuestro equipo de sustentabilidad basada en un enfoque de estudios de caso. Para finalizar, nuestras recomendaciones son: es vital apoyar cualquier acción y actividad futura inherente a la conservación, protección y puesta en valor del patrimonio y su entorno, a nivel nacional y regional, destacando como acciones prioritarias las siguientes. Favorecer un enfoque integrado del patrimonio que combine la promoción y protección de su diversidad con la gobernanza participativa en su gestión. Reconocer la necesidad de involucrar a todos los actores involucrados en los procesos de toma de decisiones. Invertir en fortalecer las instituciones. Implementar proyectos piloto integrales de conservación y regeneración, fomentando también la innovación, considerando la naturaleza evolutiva del patrimonio y el paisaje, pero respetando los valores únicos intrínsecos al lugar. Finalmente, el equipo de sustentabilidad recomienda especialmente profundizar la integración natural y cultural, y tangible e intangible, y fortalecer el enfoque contextual, integral y holístico de la relación inquebrantable entre patrimonio y paisaje. Fortalecer redes de experiencias, laboratorios y proyectos en red con miras a promover el intercambio y la transferencia de buenas prácticas y conocimientos técnicos a nivel local y global. Incorporar las dimensiones de sustentabilidad utilizadas para enmarcar la política de patrimonio mundial y desarrollo sostenible de la Unesco en los procesos de identificación, conservación, gestión y seguimiento de los bienes de patrimonio mundial. Abrir la perspectiva holística de la sustentabilidad en el patrimonio mundial a los actores locales interesados y a la sociedad civil, quienes serán quienes abracen esta dimensión fundamental, involucrando plenamente a estos actores en los procesos de identificación, conservación, gestión y monitoreo de los bienes de patrimonio mundial. Introducir una nueva lista de criterios y herramientas de monitoreo para evaluar el desempeño hacia buenas prácticas de sustentabilidad y conservación del patrimonio, con base en los principios antes enunciados. Extender el territorio de conservación al paisaje a través de nuevos criterios que permitan proteger no solo el sitio, sino el contexto del paisaje patrimonial del que forman parte. Participar en actividades de creación de capacidades con enfoques participativos para la formulación, implementación y seguimiento de planes de gestión, políticas y programas de desarrollo. Reformar el mecanismo de gobernanza de la Convención del Patrimonio Mundial, incluidas las directrices operativas y los procesos de toma de decisiones, para garantizar un proceso de toma de decisiones transparente e inclusivo en beneficio del bienestar de las comunidades y los ecosistemas. Y adoptar los sitios de patrimonio mundial como lugares de experimentación para el desarrollo sustentable, apoyándonos en la gran experiencia acumulada en los casos de estudio que han participado en la convocatoria del equipo de sustentabilidad y en coordinación con otras plataformas de buenas prácticas como Panorama, Canopy, Cavi y por supuesto el grupo de trabajo de ODS de ICOMOS. Por último, reiteramos nuestro profundo compromiso de colocar la cultura en el centro de las políticas de desarrollo sustentable, como se expresa en la declaración de Hangzhou, cuando afirma que la cultura debe verse como un facilitador fundamental de la sustentabilidad, una fuente de sentido y energía, una fuente de creatividad e innovación, y un recurso para afrontar los retos y encontrar soluciones adecuadas. El extraordinario poder de la cultura para fomentar y permitir un desarrollo verdaderamente sostenible es especialmente evidente cuando se integra un enfoque centrado en las personas y el lugar en los programas de desarrollo y las iniciativas de consolidación de la paz. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias to you, dear Lucia. Thank you so much for presenting the recommendations of the Our World Heritage Sustainability Group. These are ideas for reform in a way, today this is an opportunity to respond to these recommendations, and we will have a roundtable of eminent members of the Our World Heritage team in general, who will share with us reflections on these topics, as well as the general connection between heritage and sustainability today. So after Lucia, I will go on to introduce our next speaker, who will kick off the roundtable for us today. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Christina Cameron, who is a PhD honorary of OAA, who has held the Canada Research Chair in Built Heritage at the University of Montreal from 2005 to 2019. She is one of the founding members, we could say, of OWH. She's also a member of the advisory committee currently. She previously served as a heritage executive with Parks Canada for more than 35 years, and she worked with the World Heritage Convention since 1987, chairing the committee in 1990 and 2008, and co-authoring Many Voices, One Vision, the early years of the World Heritage Convention. Thank you for joining us today. Christina, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ege. And I just was taking off the interpretation so that it wouldn't get the double voice. Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate. And I really congratulate you on a very rich month of discussion. It's when you go over your whole list, it's really very impressive. And thank you, Lucia, for the slide presentation and the recommendations. I agree with what was in the chat, that you've done an incredible job of taking a huge volume of material and crunching it down into really worthy recommendations, ambitious for sure, but clear. And I think it's going to be helpful for the Our World Heritage Foundation moving forward. So congratulations to the whole team. It's been an impressive show. So I thought what I would focus on is one issue that came up again and again during the 44th session of the World Heritage Committee meeting that is just finishing. It is not finished yet. They're still arguing it out. But one of the things that came about often in the last 2 weeks really led me to think about what are we actually talking about in sustainable World Heritage sites? Or are we talking about sustainable conservation within World Heritage sites? And this was really to flip the perspective, because it's often what came forward is the role of World Heritage sites in sustainable development strategies, which is kind of looking at it through the other lens. And just an example of that, yesterday there was a very impressive report from the African region on it was a third periodic report. It was very, very well done. And they've set for themselves a target to really create a brand, essentially, of sustainable World Heritage system in Africa. So that's very interesting, and they've got quite good strategies around that. I really commend it to your reading, because they've got new ideas that I hadn't really heard before. So I was very impressed with that. Anyway, thinking about World Heritage and sustainable development, I thought back to the early days of the World Heritage Convention. As you know, I've dug through all that early material. And it's very clear at the beginning that the focus was on protection and not sustainability. The World Heritage Convention, when it was first created, was really seen as a new instrument or a new conservation tool to conserve the world's cultural and natural heritage. So it was not really seen in that sustainability lens at all. And the word sustainable, as you undoubtedly know, is not mentioned in the convention. So and really, when you looked at the early years, the success was really touted, the success of the convention was really being touted as whether or not the World Heritage sites were models of good conservation practice. That was really the lens and the measure. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. And I guess the word sustainable only came into the operational guidelines in 1997. So that's 25 years after the beginning of the convention, which is quite interesting. And it didn't come in as a general discussion. It came in specifically related to cultural landscapes. And in your presentation, you talked about landscapes, and I understand why. And they were really, it was attached to cultural landscapes because they are sustainable because they often reflect specific techniques of sustainable land use. That was really the idea behind that. And a specific spiritual relation to nature, which in fact we've only now really started to see in sites like Pimachawanaki. So only in 2005 did the operational guidelines actually have an independent paragraph, one paragraph on sustainable use, which was beefed up in 2011, I think, by adding communities. But it really took until 2015 for the sustainable development policy within the World Heritage System. I think it's quite revealing that where we are now is not where we were then at all. And it's an important, I think it's really an important shift that we all need to take in hand. Now, about the meeting we've just been through, or just finishing up with the World Heritage Committee, what strikes me in the debates about this year is the priority, the urgent priority that the committee gave to link conservation with development. It came back again and again. The committee members were arguing that we have to strike a balance between heritage and development needs. And this phrase was often repeated, and it's, I think, to some extent, like your comment on the circular and regenerative economy. Often they were using the phrase, there's no adequate protection without development, which is a different way of expressing, I think, circular economy. And the committee really basically was really coming from a human rights perspective, justice and human rights perspective, I would say, in insisting that developing countries deserve the same amenities enjoyed by developed countries, and that the World Heritage System needs to contribute to improving people's living conditions. I'm going to come back to that because this was really, this theme of conservation development just was interwoven into this whole discussion. I don't know those of you who've been following it if you agree with that, but that was my take. Then I was thinking back, and one of the key factors was that was causing this debate was the insertion of major infrastructure developments in or near sites. And also, there were lots of justifications of that based on commitments prior to inscription. So countries were on a different trajectory, like mining rights had been already granted, or a commitment to do a dam and so on. They had been done prior to inscription. So this is kind of two different public goods that were sitting there in the same place. So I guess in hindsight, the intense debates were actually quite predictable between the conservation-focused recommendations of the advisory bodies, particularly ICOMOS and IUCN, who were stronger on the conservation side and protection side, and the committee amendments, which were often grounded in this vision of improving living conditions, which is the sustainability side. So this was going back and forth, and I just would refer, for those of you who didn't follow, just refer to two examples. And the first is the Selous Game Reserve in the United Republic of Tanzania, which was actually recommended by IUCN for deletion from the World Heritage List because of the current construction, which is well underway, of the Julius Nyerere Dam inside the property. But this other argument kept coming back, and some committee members said you really need to consider the efforts of developing countries to look after people's needs. And that's obviously a very important argument as well. And in this case, the IUCN recommendation to delete the site was not accepted by the committee. So the site remains on the endangered list, and the construction of the dam will continue on. So that was one important example. And the other was the example of the Liverpool Maritime Mercantile City in the United Kingdom. And in this case, the committee actually accepted ICOMOS's recommendation to delete it from the World Heritage List because of the construction of tall buildings all along the waterfront and the planned construction of a football stadium within the property. So that same debate, nonetheless, came through in this discussion on Liverpool about the need to balance conservation with the regeneration of the city and its inhabitants. So it was essentially the same conversation, whether you were in a developed or developing country, which is also interesting because it kind of puts a nuance on the rhetoric. But in the end, Liverpool was removed from the World Heritage List. So in many ways, those two sites had a similar setup, if you want, but they had different outcomes. And the committee, of course, said it was a shared failure of the convention and a sad day. So that was the second thing. But in these cases and the other cases that were happening, there was a very intense and emotional debate. And the committee was clearly divided. And it really, to my mind, I take a step back and say it really shows the tension that's going to arise in the pursuit of two public goods. One is the conservation of the world's outstanding heritage. And then the other one is the improvement of living conditions and the eradication of poverty. So that's the sustainability side. So you've got this, it's the committee is kind of living this schism, if you want, and hasn't really found a good way forward for the balance, I think. And so I was really trying to think about how the two goals could be achieved, because that's, to me, that's one of it's not there yet for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very sorry to interrupt, Christina. 10 minutes we're in, so I'm going to have to ask you to conclude for this round, and then we can
one more.
Sure.
Okay, one more paragraph. There have been 3 success stories. I won't go into them, but a whaling site that was transformed from a factory to a whaling industry, moving a building, and also rerouting a road in a World Heritage Site for mining. And so actually my only other thought is about strategic environmental assessment, and whether that is not one tool that could be used to go forward so that the options are out there before decisions are made. But it doesn't deal with what I said earlier about prior commitments. There you go, Ege. It's an important subject and it's not finished.
I know, you're right, and I'm sorry to have to cut you off here.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, I suppose we cannot emphasize enough this duality that keeps coming up more and more strongly: the conservation and development and the public goods. In that case, we will go on to our next intervention. I will just share the screen to introduce Haifa Abdul Halim, an independent nature conservation expert who is also on the advisory committee of OWH, and she was co-convening the IT, the information technology debate with Christina earlier this year, very successfully. She worked for IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature World Heritage Program, over a period of more than 12 years. She was the Tabea program manager, the natural world heritage for the Arab region. She has extensive experience in capacity building and the provision of quality technical advice on all aspects of natural world heritage in the region, including state of conservation monitoring, protection and management, new inscriptions, strategy, interpretation and promotion, working with local communities. She's been the driving force behind the successful Tabea program and has an extensive knowledge of world heritage and the Arab states' regional context. So we are lucky to have Haifa with us today to share her perspectives, focusing on her expertise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, AJ. You're gonna share my presentation, or I would do that? I can't hear you.
Yes, I will. Apologies, I stopped sharing early, but we are actually going to look at Haifa's presentation here. Can you see it?
Yeah. You next? Yes. So yeah, I will try to, for my presentation, maybe we can move to the next slide so we can save more time for discussion. So like during my experience in the Arab region and like World Heritage in general, I found out that normally the World Heritage Convention is a global convention, so it normally doesn't really look into regional context or like other regional environmental context or regional cultural context, which actually sometimes make it difficult for implementation. Some with like a global guidelines doesn't really fit with the regional context. For example, in the Arab region, I will give examples how like cultural context impact World Heritage sites in Arab regions. So next, please. Yeah. So we're like for Arab region, it's like arid and semi-arid area. So most of World Heritage sites, or most of sites now, heritage sites, let's say either nature or site or culture, they are struggling with water scarcity. So they've developed different aspects or different approaches and mechanisms to collect water, to save water, to wisely use limited resources. Next, please. Yeah, so for example, Petra is like one of the best examples how the huge civilization like a Nabatean developed in the region based mainly on how they collect and harvest water and wisely manage water resources, which actually can learn now. We can learn from them how we wisely should use our resources and how we need to look into development, that development should not actually damage our sites or our environment or our heritage, so we can develop our own like new life or lifestyle. Next, please. The next example, like the Aflaj irrigation system in Oman, it's not only like it's a World Heritage site, but it's still a live system. It's still working and it's managed by community. So the communal value actually protect how this site is still working as a income and a resource of income for community. So still you can go and see these sites, it's still bringing income. The farms are still working. So also we need to look into these previous or like let's say historic sites or traditional practices, how it's still working and how they manage resources wisely, and they do development. They live and like achieve good life, good willing of people who live in these areas. Next, please. Yeah. One of the systems that for a while disappeared, and then now they are promoted. It's more promoted now, and like as a solution for grazing system. So HEMA system is like a protected area landscape, mainly for rangelands where like we graze animals or harvesting natural plants, and it's managed by communities. Now there are some countries like Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and some areas in Oman, they reviving this system as a solution to balance between like vegetation cover protection because it's needed, and it's also less cost at the government. In addition, that managed by communities, so it's like a community system that really working well if it's really controlled by the government, or say supervised by the government to achieve equitable benefit for communities. Yeah, next, please. And also, if we look to the agricultural landscape, so this is like for people who work on nature conservation, agricultural landscape is very important because it's also provide refuge for communities. These traditional practices, the communities in these traditional places or landscape, they don't actually differentiate between wild animal or domesticated animals. They don't differentiate between nature and their own farms. They communicate as a landscape. It's all part of their life. So they wisely use these resources around them, either water management or agriculture, like vegetation cover management or like wooding and etc. In addition, we need to look into these traditional practices, how it provides solution for like many issues we have now for agriculture, like diseases, crops, and like, yes, maybe it's less productive, but it's have more ability to survive extreme conditions. Like now we're gonna face climate change. We're gonna face more diseases in these crops. So like we need to look into these heritage sites as to learn from them and see how we can find solutions for development, for sustainable development. Next, please. So for Socotra, like this is one of the examples how the government sometimes they decide to do sustainable development without doing like a strategic impact assessment. Like road networks is not something easy to do. People think it's something like a very easy and quick, but based on the case on Socotra, we found out it's like not the case. So you can see that these roads actually, it's only 1 year old, and it's damaged because of like when they built this network, they didn't like really communicate with either environmental expert or with local communities to tell them that the location of these roads or streets are not the best locations. For instance, the second picture, if you look at it, the second picture actually, it's an area called Valley of the Valleys. So all water go into this valley in a monsoon season, like the rain season or flood season. So most of the street, 90% of street in the island vanished because there were no proper management or impact assessment or even studies for these street. The third picture is one of the building that one of the development project built for local community to attract tourism. Honestly, the building since it was established 1996 until I went like 2014, they never used because the community is not really interested to use this as for tourism activity. They will use their houses. And this is one of the issues we face in development, that we don't really, like the government and like sometimes donors, they decide on some things, they don't communicate with the communities, and they think they do these activities for them and they will use them, and actually it doesn't, because they don't want to have a village like next to their village for tourists. They want to host them at their house because it's easy for them. It's easy to do it. So these also things I noticed in our work in development, that we don't really communicate properly with other stakeholders. Yeah, next, please. Yeah, so like, as I said, the street impact is not only the pollution happened, but actually it's shifted. It caused shifting and changes in traditional grazing systems in Socotra. And then we faced many issues, other issues in on environment, such as overgrazing in some areas. So because the whole system, whole grazing system changed, so they put their animals in one car and they move them to other area. So when they reach to the next area, they are so hungry, so they eat the trees, the endemic trees, the dragon blood trees, which actually cause a huge decline in the number of these trees and this threatened species, this threatened tree, which actually took years to figure out what is the reason the decline. At the beginning, they were thinking that it's climate change, but we found that it's not only climate change, the major impact of this shifting. So as Christina mentioned earlier, we need to do a strategic impact assessment for the whole area to suggest projects, not to wait until we have like one by one projects. Yeah, next please. So to achieve effective sustainable approaches, we need to achieve different things. First, we need to have a good governance. So like to find a mechanism, or let's say dynamic between different stakeholders, how they communicate and how they make decisions about different things for different issues. It's very important to understand the environmental context, because it's completely changed how we deal with different things and different issues. And we need also to understand social context. And like with the recommendation, I will explain why we need to understand that and how this affects our work. So by this, we can achieve effective conservation for the OUV, the outside universal values, and also I believe we can also achieve equitable benefit to all stakeholders. So like they can be, most of them, we cannot say like everybody will be happy, but at least most of them will be happy. Yeah, next please. So for recommendations, like this is like what I think is sustainable development should be treated as an approach, as a guide, as a goal, not as a tool, not as a goal, because sustainable development is an approach of life to maintain our lives to the next generation, to maintain like decent life for next generations. And we need to translate these, like the good practices we have in the whole world, which I feel that we don't really document. We need to document more the good practices that we have in different locations, different regions, so we can learn, exchange experiences.
I'm sorry, it's 10 minutes already, so we need to speed up a little bit. So sorry.
Yeah. I'm just, yeah. So like sustainable development is an interconnected like approach. And we also, maybe we can move to the next slide because I feel it's more important. Yeah. So we need to understand that the social context, that different community members have different roles, and we should not interfere and change it, impose, or let's say impose changes in this system. But we need to let's say understand and respect, and then reflect. So we can develop, because communities are more resilient to change and climate change, and they have ability to innovate solutions for these changes and develop like more good practices. So yeah, but you can see like it's already written, so everybody can like read it later. And yeah, and thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Haifa. Again, it's been very unfortunate for me to cut you off, but very important insights for us. Thank you, especially the traditional practices and traditional knowledge emphasis that you made. I'm going to stay in the PowerPoint because our next speaker is going to be introduced over here. Now moving from Haifa, we have the only male speaker, so gender balance today has been upset for the in the other way than usual. So he was very forgiving with this, and we are very happy to have Professor Michael Turner with us from Bezalel University in Jerusalem. He is also one of the founding members of OWH and an advisory committee member. He's an architect and the UNESCO chairholder in urban design and conservation studies at the Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design, Jerusalem. He worked in the public sector in Israel for several decades, and as specialist of historic cities, opened his own firm in 1983, working on urban planning and conservation projects. He was appointed head of the World Heritage Committee of Israel, which he supervised until 2011. He has a long history of involvement in several professional and academic organizations, including ICOMOS Israel. He's also collaborated with Unesco on several projects like the recommendation on the historic urban landscape, and he's an advisor to the director of the World Heritage Center on issues related to architecture, urban planner, and conservation. I'm just going to stop sharing now so we can see Michael more clearly. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us here today.
Okay, just share my screen. Thank you, Ega. Thank you, the team. Francesco Banderini at the opening actually said that Ega was a super tanker. The super tanker is really the whole team, really of a month of such exciting activities. So I'd like to really also thank the previous speakers who really set the scene, and specifically Christina, who has allowed I'll be able to go quicker because in fact she'd taken some of the thoughts. But I'm going to speak very simply about sustainable development. And I think from the text of our session, it is allowing misinterpretations of the latter to undermine the former. And I think that nothing could be more critical than listening to the World Heritage sessions about interpreting, assessing, and managing development in World Heritage site urgently needed to remedy this situation. So we have another two women to bring onto the screen, and the first one is Indira Gandhi. She was the only person to speak at the 1972 Stockholm conference. And I think that one of the most important things was she was actually, she wrote that, I remember Edward Thompson, a British writer and good friend of India, once telling Mr. Gandhi that wildlife was fast disappearing. Remarked the Mahatma, it is decreasing in the jungles, but it is increasing in the town. And I think that this is really the jungle which he was speaking about, also relating to the fact that the issues really are the inherent conflict is not between conservation and development, between environment and reckless exploitation of man and earth in the name of efficiency. And I'm putting these points, which are really very critical. She goes on in the discussion to say how she goes to the upper areas of India and then speaks to the younger people who want to be modern like everybody else. The second lady that I would like to invite is Mrs. Rutland. And again, Our Common Future put on board the actual idea of sustainable development. But we never really consider it the concept of needs, and particularly the essential needs of the world's poor, and the idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization. Now, this is really where the critical part comes on board, because the environmental revolution was somewhere between a commercial revolution and what is happening now, which is the digital revolution. This is the challenge which will allow us to move forward and take on board exactly what Mrs. Brundtland actually brought to the table. So one of the things, the recommendations which everybody has put on board is the holistic and integrative approach of planet, people, and prosperity. And there's so many mechanisms that we have that we're all completely confused. But nevertheless, we have to take them apart and see exactly out of the silo and actually make a really excellent soup. So the first way forward is actually to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable is goal 11, but it is the target of the protecting of the safeguarding of world's cultural and natural heritage to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And it's exactly what Christina said. It's flipping round the coin in the other way, and which puts the new role of where we are. Christina spoke about Salus in Liverpool, and there were another two which I thought were interesting, that of Lahore and the Sundarbans. So if we look therefore at Liverpool, we were actually given a project of urban development, which this might be the current, but this is what is being proposed, of which the stadium, which you'll see at the last slide, is really quite interesting. And if we're looking at the Sundarbans, then we are actually looking at Bangladesh, the natural sites, and actually setting up of a coal-fired energy. Why coal? Why this place? Why couldn't it be thought out as a multilateral solution? Immediately that we take on mutual responsibilities, then solutions can come much better. And the Selous Game Reserve also shows exactly the pressures which have taken place about what we were put on about well-being. But it's also the issue of recklessness, perhaps, which we need to resort to. It's not sustainable, it's not development and heritage, it's heritage and sustainable development, and not what Indira Gandhi said about recklessness. And in fact, this road, which we can actually see, the highway, sort of the road, the metro line, which is then in front of the Shalimar Gardens, could have been lower down, but they said, no problem, we would just have to take away 20,000 housing units to actually do it. How do you balance 20,000 housing units for actually taking away then the line? Now, I'm just going to come up with last point. And the last point is that we have to stop thinking about then universal value, because we're talking about geocultural values. We actually are working on the regional recommendations. And in fact, Franz Boas, in the end of the 19th century, wrote a most important article called The Limitations of the Comparative Method. In other words, we have to realize that there's comparative methods, which are essentially etic, and the historical methods that are emic. In other words, we are questioning exactly the issue of the comparative method, and we have to then rethink of it as in its understanding its regional context. This in architecture moved us from the comparative method as Bannister Fletcher to critical regionalism, which was developed by essentially by Alexander Tsonis, who was a good friend of mine and also came to Bezalel. But this was taken on by Kenneth Frampton, but it actually, the critical regionalism and approach to architecture strives to counter the placelessness and lack of identity. What could be more better and important for heritage? So what you did in what we've all done over the past month is regional recommendations. This is wonderful. We must keep them regional. We must keep the identities in this way, in the same way as that we had it for Asia and Pacific, we had it for Latin America, and the format that was prepared is absolutely fantastic. So I think that the actual assessment and the greens and the reds are most important. But it's not the greens that we have to look at. We have to look at the reds. We have to learn from our mistakes. We want to check Liverpool. We want to study the Selous. We want to study then the Sundarbans. We want to understand that of how to bring it together. So it is the issue between complications and complexities. And in fact, the complexity on one hand occurs when a number of interactions between components increases dramatically, which is where we are. And it's the interdependencies that allow viruses and bank runs to spread. This is where things become quickly unpredictable. That's where we are. We're in complex systems. And I was in one of the elements in discussing Liverpool, and I was there with the group of people, and they said, and they asked, is it a status worth fighting for? I told them, no, it's not worth fighting for if you want something else. But it is if you believe that culture is an enabler for sustainable development to make our cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. You really took the problem into an opportunity to honor these important ladies in history with Indira Gandhi and Gro Harlem Brundtland. Thank you for that as well. And thank you for appreciating our case studies methodology so much. You've been following that closely, we know. Our colleagues Lucia and Pamela are a big part of our supertanker team. So very nice that you are honoring our work there. In that case, we are going to move on to our next speaker, who will be Patricia O'Donnell, the president of OWH herself. She is She has been elected the president of the board of the newly founded Our World Heritage Foundation. So our initiative has become an actual NGO very recently. And she is a powerhouse, a woman of herself, Patricia. She's a preservation landscape architect and urban planner. A lot of acronyms you see of her titles in the US and elsewhere: PLA, FASLA, AICP, US ICOMOS. She founded her Heritage Landscapes LLC practice in 1987. She's contributed to ASLA, which she may help with what the acronym is for later on, I believe. ICOMOS, we all know, and IFLA, landscape architects, of course, Our World Heritage and UNESCO World Heritage, to advance the valued landscape, cultural and natural heritage of diverse places and peoples in the USA and around the globe. She has completed more than 450 cultural landscape preservation and sustainability projects with attention to historic character, community engagement, sustainability, and related themes, of course, and implementation through documents and volunteer initiatives and guidelines. So thank you for being with us here, Patricia. I will give it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Ege. Excellent session, great speakers. Thanks for the invitation. I think it's important for us to look back a little as we look forward. Mike looked back further, so did Christina, but I found this photo that I took of the poster board at IUCN's 2016 Congress, the first large nature culture journey in Hawaii, and looking at it, I found here a scientist who likes goals, SDGs, lots of reading and resource information, and it's not all bad news. So I think one of the things that's happened this month in the work of the sustainability team is to look for good news. I want to share a model I like. I know that there's debates on this, but what is sustainability? Culture and nature permeates and heritage sustains. And I'm particularly interested in adding the word asset. The reason is that when we say resource, it's something we can take, use, abuse. When we say asset, it has inherent value. I find it amazing that we actually have the 17 visionary global goals. In 2015, I can't say that we had a fully functional planet and a series of state parties that all would work in harmony, as we do not today. But for some miracle, we actually approved these really visionary goals. In this particular work in the OWH sustainability, I was struck in a couple of sessions by this community co-learning and rising together process. And I think in particular, this case at Bamberg, where the gardens are inside, as you see in this fabulous aerial, and they have unique genetic types of plants and a cadre of gardeners. And it was really about assets, community, visitors, and tourism in an integrated model, continuing to strive so that we can reach the 4 Ps, one place at a time. So one of the key issues in the case studies is this notion of one place at a time. Lucia did a presentation on the 24th. 75% of the cases said they were cultural landscapes. Are they inscribed as cultural landscapes? No. But are they functioning as cultural landscapes? Yes. So I think there's an interesting current challenge that I see, that if we thought about the model of cultural landscapes at the center, we would see these relationships between sustainability, economy, environment, society, climate action, integrated biocultural diversity at all scales, place values, responsibility, and commitment at the local level, and intergenerational inclusion, bringing us to the future in a stronger way. In September of this year, the UN Biodiversity Summit spoke to 75% of the planet terrestrial surface deeply human altered, which gives us 75% cultural landscape in various forms to find solutions that are intertwined and inseparable in nature and culture. I loved Mike's image of complexity. I have an image for you here about biological and cultural diversity and their integration, natural habitats and human-shaped, tangible and intangible heritage, and the fact that these are not truly symmetrical. We do have more human-shaped habitats, and we recognize and value the tangible heritage more than we have the intangible heritage. So with that model, another interesting case that was brought forward, I've lost the name of the person up here, sorry, the Nahua women that work together, and this issue of generating jobs for women artisans to mitigate the effects of tourism and empower localities. We also had this interesting study in Spain of this region, and note the number of agricultural plot owners, 3,676 people that have to somehow work in a collaborative way. So bringing forward these combined works of nature and humanity that are cultural landscapes to work in an integrated manner. The self-assessment forum revealed some very interesting trends, and in each of these fields of importance that were delved into in the case studies, we see this color map that really provides us with some patterns. I think that the continuation of a case study process and building on this will really bring us forward. The red is bad, the gray is we don't even know, and the green is best. So the thing that's interesting about doing case studies that focus on best practices and present the best practices, when you look at this chart, you see that in each of those localities, there is not green across the whole thing. So what we highlight is what works. And what we recognize in this particular case study model is where we have to still work harder and where we need to share and co-learn. So with that, I will go back to this model in closing and simply indicate that there are tool groups: good governance, community empowerment, knowledge, traditions, and innovations, regulation, customs and law, finance, and economic health. We may work in one of these realms. What we need to know is who to partner with to have a more transversal and complete process that will strengthen inclusion, justice, and management into the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. This systems thinking and engaging the complexity for us with culture, nature, it's what you do so well for us. So thank you, and also for appreciating and using our case studies so well to illustrate points. So very happily then moving on to our final panelist of the roundtable today, who will be Maaike Goedkoop, our Secretary General of our World Heritage Foundation. She's an urban planner focused on heritage and environmental impact assessments. Impact assessment has been coming up a lot, by the way, if you might have noticed today. Maaike is a scientific assistant at the Chair for History and Theory of Urban Design at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH Zurich. She's currently conducting research on asphalt road development in urban landscapes. I think you might find asphalt also a very interesting topic for us today, heritage people. We had a nice conversation with her about that today. She's a member of the ICOMOS SDGs working group as well. And Mike has been one of the driving forces of how OWH works, especially with networking and outreach. So very, very important contributions for us. Thank you, Mike. The floor is yours.
Hello, Ege. Thank you for this very kind introduction. I will explain to others what I explained to you. The word asphalt is so crucial because this like narrows down the scope of research from 3,000 years to only 100 years, since asphalt is a very recent component in our landscapes. So far. So first of all, I would like to thank you, Ege, Lucia, Pamela, and Jana, and all other members of the wonderful team of sustainability. It was quite amazing to work with you the last month. And you made it such a success and so skillfully, so really congratulations. Today I would like to basically end the panelist rounds. Let me share screen first. I would like to talk about what it is to be a young impact assessment specialist in the field of urban development. It's a very personal story, but I think the experience is relevant. I also know that it's like really, it is really personal and really self-standing probably. So as Ege said, I've studied architecture and urban planning, and with a strong affinity to the modern urban agenda in historic environments, I started my professional career. So after my studies, I had the incredible opportunity to help in a very small team of heritage impact assessment consultants working on various UNESCO World Heritage sites in Europe, for example, in Sweden, Germany, Turkey, Montenegro, and Croatia. It was really fantastic. I learned so incredibly much. And in that same year, I also had the opportunity to organize and participate in HIA workshops in collaboration with UNESCO, ICOMOS, and IUCN. And I attended 2 of the World Heritage Committee meetings in Bonn and Istanbul. And truly, this is always my dream job. I always say it's my dream job. I started with my dream job. But because making an HIA is extremely demanding, even for a very senior person, it cannot provide a stable living for a young person. After realizing I always lacked of one or of the other skills, such as field knowledge of management, knowledge of the convention. You need to be all round and you need to know everything at the same time. So this makes it very difficult for a young professional. So I decided to go back to my home country and work on an average job to create some muscles. And I ended up in an urban planning firm that only worked in the Netherlands. And later I worked for the Dutch Commission for Environmental Impact Assessment. At least this way I could make a living, but I lost touch with the international heritage field. So this was my story. I would like to share 2 observations from that time as a young professional focused on the urban development and HIA, working in a field that needs to be adapted to the computer age. Because HIAs in World Heritage sites are often made in very small teams that consist of individual experts working on the provenance of their previous, often decades-long careers. And this is totally legit, because as an HIA expert, you carry a huge responsibility that requires a lot of specialized practice and experience, life experience. In other words, due to this highly demanding heritage impact assessment practice and the inaccessibility for young people, new skills only enter the scene very late. So I imagine that my generation, the young generations have to wait till they're skilled enough to perform a heritage impact assessment. New skills only enter the scene very late, and the innovation in the field is training. So this is my statement. The other is my observation. The other thing that I observed is that the field is quite text-oriented. Of course, text is not to be undermined, but I observed that the field is very language-oriented, which is in a way, considering the current tools and opportunities with the computer, a very old-fashioned way of building a career. I felt that I carried knowledge that was not compatible with the old textual way of doing, and I could also not develop the technical side because I needed to adapt to the textual environment. So it felt, it felt that I needed to specialize in something that I thought, I'm worth more in another way. But this is my personal experience. Ultimately, the only way for me to work on impact assessment as a young person is to wait and become skilled enough in whatever is required and come back another day. Of course, this was very unsatisfying. So I guess what I want to say is that involving young generations will accelerate the change we need. They were raised and trained in a different reality, a reality that is quite relevant in a time where change is essential and intergenerational collaboration is crucial. And this is, and it is essential to not only involve young people in the governance and academic fields, but also in practice. This is something that we hardly talk about, because practice is where everything happens. Assessment field needs to provide a space for young, technical-oriented people to test and explore new tools that are fit for practice, and find new digital languages instead of these long reports that keep being written. As a governor, it is of course safe to choose skilled professionals to work with, but asking young consultants and maybe even young people from outside the field that carry computer knowledge and carry a different outlook is the right thing to do. So yeah, so this was basically my statement as maybe a pre-knob for tomorrow, the youth forum. Last thing I would like to say that I love to collaborate in our World Heritage Initiative, because here I feel that my words are not interpreted as a critique by the knowledgeable generations above me, but rather seen as one of the colors of the palette. And this completely renewed my interest in the field of heritage. And I'm so thankful to collaborate here, and particular to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Maaike. Well, we're all fortunate that OWH has actually warmed you back up into the heritage field. We should not lose such a brilliant colleague like Maaike. And what you said really raises questions on how such a critical field can, I mean, from what you say, be missing a huge opportunity of using young skills. I mean, how, actually, if I may ask a small follow-up question, aren't HIA teams big teams where there's room for young people beside older colleagues? So there can be some kind of an apprentice-master relationship co-working space. Doesn't that work?
What you describe is the wished for situation, but in my experience, and of course that is limited, this is absolutely not the case. It's a field where it's a competitive field. You need to go low in the prices. You want to optimizations are done in the wrong ways, and yeah, this leaves very little room for a young person that really wants to make a living also. Because of course it's nice to work and you can always work, but when you actually want to make a living and you need to pay a house it becomes very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to be so skilled, and this is very expensive and much of an investment for a HIA team in a way. This is my experience.
It reflects realities of the sector in many ways. Well, thank you for this color that you added to the panel. So we've completed our what we call the round table, and we're a little bit behind time. After this round of interventions, we've been planning a Q&A and then closing remarks by Patricia as the OWH president today. We have some time for Q&A, and that could facilitate us to provide more interventions, more ideas right now. But I'm going to ask Jana to help us here with any questions that have been raised in the Zoom or the YouTube?
Don't have any questions.
Okay, today it's been more listening and less question asking. That's fine. Well, in that case, I'm going to have to use what's been said to pose some questions here to help our discussion. So we're talking that it's not all bad news, as Patricia said, but on the other hand, we all feel the need for more good news, and there seems to be some kind of a blockage in the system. The committee session has been showing in stark relief some real problems going on in places. So what is the biggest barrier in the system when you're in terms of the actors, the processes, how the governance works? Where should we shine the spotlight on to actually resolve this blockage? And I want to actually put that in context of the conservation versus development issue. And it seems like conservation is really misunderstood, and it's seen as something separate, either or development, whereas it's part of development is what we're saying, but there's a misunderstanding somewhere. So where should we shine our light? Anybody volunteer? Christina. Please, Christina.
I'm inspired by Mike and his challenge of regional as opposed to outstanding value, if you want. And it raises a thorny question, which I think is underlying some of the discussion. And that is are there different standards? Let's put it very bluntly. Is there a different standard in judging development in a developing world as opposed to a developed world? And in the case of developed world, is there a need to reduce our consumption? Is that the implication, and is that why there's so much tension? That's a reflection that I've been having. That's very tricky.
Mike wants to answer it. Please.
Yeah, the reason why I've come this way is because we're trying to work on the modern heritage of Africa. And it's not the modern heritage in Africa, but of Africa. In other words, how do you define modern? It's not a time frame, it's a mindset. In other words, immediately you start making comparison, it's irrelevant. So therefore, Franz Boas, who was the anthropologist who in fact confronted the issue of the comparative analysis, actually said we have to go to then the historical part. It obviously must be that and that we must actually put them together and have both of them. But in the operational guidelines for tentative listing, it does speak about geocultural groupings. So we're talking very much about this. So I'm saying, yes, we have to challenge this strange dichotomy between the particular and the universal. And we have to sort of then move it very strongly about this particular. This is my thoughts about it. And I think that we have a lot to learn from anthropology, because they're the people who are managing then the texts which we actually try to deal with culture, with apologies to Haifa about the nature. And then the other one is about Micah was saying is about the importance of intergenerational. And I think it's very much what we're talking about, and Lucia spoke about the circularity. It's not directional. Immediately we say directional, it's north-south, east-west. It's not going to work. It is then the circularity about it. And that is also, this is the relationship between intergenerational. It's not one way. I benefit as much with young people as young people will benefit from me. Immediately when Christina wrote this about the computer skills. So in fact, when we see this as a circular part, then we're going to get somewhere, and that is what sustainability is about.
Thank you very much. Yes, intergenerationality, geocultural groupings, but I think we're still not too clear on developing versus developed world and nation states and geocultural groupings. How can we operationalize this more? Can anyone help? Maybe I'd like to actually think a little bit more about the techniques of the World Heritage System. I mean, it's difficult for many of us because it's a very complicated and technocratic system where very few of us are really masters at it. But still, I think we need to engage more, understand how the whole system works in terms of decision making, and how do decisions need to evolve to cater to this cultural diversity, geocultural, regional diversity. Patricia.
I think one of the things we can really look at, and which some of your sessions looked at, is the tentative lists in countries, state parties. The decision-making process actually begins with the framing of tentative lists. The issue for tentative lists are expert-led versus community and regional voices led, or at least incorporated. I know that the last 2 rounds of tentative lists in the United States were bottom up as well as expert. And it made a different result. It created a different list because there were a series of issues, for difficult issues. For example, our civil rights sites throughout the country, and it reflects the current issues of racial injustice, and it's about time to deal with it long past. So the tentative lists feel like a political and technical process in a country. If we can do some case studies about framing tentative lists and vetting and adding to tentative lists that are bottom up, we would serve the process. We would help to enlarge the pool of how citizens and communities consider tentative listed properties. So that's from the World Heritage side. From the protected areas side, we have a lot more room to look at and think about, because protected places are in nearly every community. And those are about local values, local voices, and keeping them for daily quality of life.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Again, I'm sorry to interrupt. We do have a question, and I believe it's in Spanish. I tried translating it. So I think what it means is, what do you think are the reasons why governments see governance as a threat and not an opportunity, and how to overcome it? Maybe Lucia or Pamela can see the question in Spanish, but I guess this is what it means. So governments see governance as a threat and not as an opportunity. So it's a good question, and I think it's coming from
Micah, go ahead.
Haifa raised her hand. Technically, there were organic hands, but I'll go with the technical, the digital hands. Haifa.
So based on my experience, I feel it's mainly about personal issues of power. Like institutions, they prefer to keep power into their hands because they feel that they can control more, and less difficulties and less complications. That's why they prefer to. And I saw that it's the governance of the World Heritage Convention or systems in general really affect what's happening on the ground and how decisions happened or taken on the ground. It's like, and I saw this through discussions with state parties. They refuse to hear anything from ground because, like at the committee, they make decisions, so they refuse to hear anything from the ground. So I think it's based on control and less headache for them. This is my experience.
Well, perhaps they could look at governance as an opportunity to make life easier for them, but they don't seem to see it that way. Okay, Jana, I'm going to give the floor to Micah, and it's 3 minutes past, so maybe after that comment, should we go on to the closing remarks?
Yeah,
I see there's a new question though, is there? Or
I think it's Pamela trying to translate. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Pamela.
All right, Micah.
Thanks for the translation. I think that the governments see governance as a threat if you specifically say heritage governance or cultural governance, because one of the most sensible things I've heard in the last few years why culture is always so difficult to advocate for is that if if governors make a decision on a cultural issue, they automatically minoritize. The diversity of culture is so big. If you govern one part, you will always neglect the other part. So you will always make enemies, and making enemies is not in the political best will. And this is very, I like the good words. This was very well explained in the UNESCO committee meeting in Istanbul by someone working at UNESCO. I don't recall her name, but this was very, very interesting to hear her say that.
Yeah, thank you. It's tricky. I think we are now moving to the closing remarks, where I think Patricia will really nicely pull together what we've been talking about. She has another few slides, I think, for us. So I'll give over the floor to Patricia to synthesize for us. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm starting again with this fabulous color map, because I think it's really important to say that the work of the month is about the case study's ability to discern trends, the issues of co-learning and sharing. One of the points we haven't really made much today is that the issues are transversal. I heard that in several of the sessions, and that the solutions are likewise transversal. I think the other thing is that we often pound the table about community engagement and how we should be thinking about community, but we often dumb it down. We're not talking about the heterogeneous community that really exists. So I found this particular frame interesting on the 24th, that shows everything in yellow, orange, and red for peace and security. When your concerns are about peace and security, heritage is not primary in your mind. I think that there are inequalities and exclusion that is created in civil unrest, and we have rising pressures of climate change that require action. So it's about how you can work at a site in essentially a state of chaos and complexity. Coming back to these, I think one of the key issues in 16 and 17, which is where we have been this month, is moving beyond silos and bringing together daily life traditions, natural and cultural heritage, tangible and intangible heritage, to overcome dominance with inclusion. There's another nice frame here. Much good practice exists, but challenges remain. Need to go further. Move beyond the splits, come to contextual, comprehensive, and holistic vision. We pound the drum for heritage, but we also have to say, okay, we're heritage professionals, let's work with others beyond the frame of heritage professionals and beyond the frame of heritage advocates. One of the really nice trends I saw was this cabbie tourism cases, and the fact that cabbie has started this in July, and it started it in April 2021, has already got a platform built and wants to collaborate with OWH. So one of the outcomes of the month is finding new partners. This Og Traveler case study looked at tourist self-guided platforms and clearly articulated two of the goals being a part of their thinking from the outset. And back to this asymmetrical diagram that basically shows it all functions together. We put forward a case that was a local park. The thing that was interesting about it is that we showed where the goals were being touched on, and that working in this local park next to an African-American neighborhood of lower and middle incomes with high crime rates made a difference, and that the quality of public spaces and urban biodiversity must increase in all communities in order for them to prosper. So this is a really powerful image that Evrim Ulusan brought forward about these relationships in listing: legalities, power relationships, technicalities, conflict and its resolution, and the limits of who can be involved, which is why a few minutes ago I touched on the tentative list as a way for community participation. But these issues are really important as we go forward. Applying tools, moving toward inclusion, justice, management, and leadership from intergenerational basis, and walking the talk. This is where I live. It's, to me, really important for us to walk our talk. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. What a great way to end. Thank you. And Patricia really does walk the talk. And I think what brings all of us together is that we are all very committed to walking the talk. And I think we'll continue to do that. And so I'm going to try to make a couple of more remarks in ending the session, but I mean, Patricia really has said it all. And we'll just take this forward into the other weeks and months of OWH this year and after next year for the 50th anniversary. Although we are very tired, so we'll probably take a little break in August. Jana wants to add something. Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
Well, how do people feel? Why not, I guess?
Yeah, how would be the interaction between the private sector and the public is achieved for a good management of the patrimony? This is from Florencia from Argentina.
Okay.
Can you repeat it? Public
Yes.
and private?
How would be the interaction between the private sector and the public sector is achieved for a good management of the patrimony? Interaction between the private and the public sector for management of World Heritage, I guess. Yeah.
Well, that's going into a big topic again, just as we were wrapping up. But Patricia, what do you say?
I just wanted to make a brief one to say that when we are managing local heritage, there needs to be a process for local voices. And it goes back to those 5 tool groups. If we're living in a place with good governance, there are ways forward. When we have poor governance, we have to advocate.
Governance again. Yes. So let's take all these ideas and reflect more and see how we can move forward. And Lucia has shared the link for owhvoices.org. This is one of the other ways we're walking the talk, trying to get a platform for people to comment on the session discussions. And we will also look forward to seeing you at the Youth Forum tomorrow. We have surprises and beautiful interventions from young people. And it's very strange to end this month of debate. So looking forward to seeing you soon. Everybody, thank you very much. Thank you, Lucia. Thank you, Jana. Thank you, Mike, Christina, Patricia, Haifa, Mike, Maria, Avila, Pamela, and everybody else here. Take good care and have a wonderful day. So bye-bye for now.
Thank you very much. Great job.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank Hannah, Mike, Ege, Haifa, Patricia.